Hi, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 2. As you might know me from the YouTube channel, Xmas Superyacht YouTube channel, we are now doing a podcast. It is called the Yacht Report Podcast. It is a new thing. This might be the first time you've seen it. If you're watching on the new channel, we have a new YouTube channel. Welcome. It's called the Yacht Report Podcast. You might be shocked to learn. And we're also on Spotify now, and we're also on Apple Podcasts. I will eventually get it out to every place that people download podcasts. But like I said, it's still new. So I hope you had a great Christmas or whatever it is that you celebrate at this time. I'm not a big celebrator of Christmas myself, but we still obviously take time and have a rest over this time. So the channel has been a little bit quiet lately, the main YouTube channel. It is very unusual to be not on board a yacht or a vessel of some sort. That I've been in the industry. I've been in the maritime industry for almost 25 years now, and in that time, in those 25 years, I've probably had maybe 2 or 3 times where I've not been on board at Christmas. Now, it doesn't always work out that way if you're thinking about starting a career at sea, and if the idea of that puts you off, that is not necessarily the way it goes. It's just the way it's gone for me. Generally, if you have a rotation, meaning that for every day you work, you earn a day off, then you should, if you have a good rotation, you should never have to do 2 Christmases in a row. Unfortunately for me, I've either been on a boat with a crappy rotation system, or no rotation, or I've left one job and gone to another, and it's just so worked out that I've had to do that. I've done a Christmas, then I've gone to a new job, and then I've had to do the Christmas again. So for various different reasons, I'm almost always on board at Christmas, which is not really a problem for me, like I said, because I'm not that big a celebrator of it. So what's it like on board a yacht at Christmas? It's a good question. Maybe you might have ideas of what it might be like, and you might think it's, we just celebrate it in the same way as you do at home. You might think that we have a few days off, and the boss is on board. But when I say boss, by the way, I mean obviously the owner of the vessel. If he's on board, you might thinking that he gives us all a few days off, and then he just sits there, makes his own food and stuff like that. It doesn't work like that at all. So I'll explain what it's like. Boss on versus boss off. So i.e. owner on board or guests on board versus no guests or owners on board. So the first thing is, if a yacht is boss off or no guests on board, unless the vessel has to be somewhere to start a boss season, a boss trip, so let's say we're in the Med and the boss says, I'm leaving, I'm going to come back in 2 months, and the boat needs to be in the Caribbean, then obviously the boat's got to do a transatlantic. The owner, I've never worked in my 20 plus years, I've never been in a situation where the owner wants to do a transatlantic crossing. So they leave, and then they come back when the boat's in place. So in that situation, obviously, we'd have to do a transatlantic. So obviously that means that we're working all the time, right? So everybody's working every day. The people on the bridge are doing their rotations, the watchers on the bridge, and the people in the engine room are doing the same, and so on and so forth. So, however, if the boss leaves in the Med and he's not coming back till the following year, and the boat's just staying in the Med, then the boat will be laid up somewhere like Palma de Mallorca. Could be anywhere. Cartagena. These are places that I've been laid up in the past. Italy. You might go into a shipyard period, because when the owner's on board, obviously you can't do engine services and stuff like that when the owner's on board. That has to wait until he's not on board. So that is a great opportunity to get those jobs done. Sanding the teak decks, doing the decks, stuff like that. That has to wait until there's no guests on board. So that stuff might happen in the winter. If that doesn't happen, you're laid up. So you're just alongside somewhere. And then the next question might be, what the crew do when the boat's laid up. We just sit there. No, we're all still working. We've all got jobs. Like I said, we've all got work to do. There's lots of projects that get done in those periods, like I just explained. But the difference is at Christmas time, unless you have an a-hole captain, you will get, and I've had a few of those, you will get a day off at Christmas. Usually you might even get a couple of days off, and same on New Year's Day, you might get a day off if there's nobody on board. But what you've got to remember is that if you join a boat and you're on rotation, you've got to go there with the attitude that you're going to work. Like your rotation could be 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that. Probably one of those things. If you're going there for 10 weeks, then you've got to go there with the mindset that you're going to be working for 10 weeks. Can't go there thinking, well, I hope we get every Sunday off or something like that. You might get it if you're in the shipyard. The shipyard's closed on the weekend anyway. You might work Saturday and get Sunday off. So if you do, you're lucky because you're still earning a day's leave on those days, right? So that's a great situation to be in. You've got to go there thinking, right, I'm going for 10 weeks to work. I'm going to have 10 weeks off at the end of it. So I'm going there with that mindset that I'm working every day. And if you get a day off, it's a bonus. That's the way you're going to look at it. A lot of crew come to expect these extra days off, and then they get upset when they don't get them. I always maintained this mindset that if I get a day off, then it is literally, a freebie. So anyway, in the situation that I've just described, you're on board, you're working, you're in a shipyard, or you're laid up somewhere, and it comes to Christmas. So what's going to happen is the chef is going to do a Christmas dinner or Christmas lunch. And what I've always done, well, not always, but the majority of the time when I knew I was going to have the day off, I would always volunteer in the galley and say, do you want me to help? I'll peel potatoes, I'll wash the pans, I'll do whatever. And some yachts, they will have this system where they expect everyone to do a little, to muck in. So it's not just the chef working. And then but generally you're not working, and you get to have a Christmas lunch with the other crew. And the stewardesses or stewards will set up the mess, make it look nice. They'll play music. They'll have some beers, have some wine, stuff like that. And then they'll have a bit of a party. And then, maybe I have later on, they'll have some drinking and stuff like that. It's something I never really take part in because I'm not a big drinker. Now, what happens in terms of presents? Do we get a present? Well, generally what the yachts do is they have something called Secret Santa. I'm sure you've all heard of it. You basically put everybody's name in a hat, and then everybody picks out a name, and then you buy a present for that person, and then they get that present. And that way you only have to buy one present. You don't have to buy 5 presents, if you've got a good group of friends on board. So it works out quite well. I have in the past picked my own name out of a hat for Secret Santa, and I did not say anything, and I bought myself a gift. So it's not ideal because at the time I didn't really know how Secret Santa worked, and I picked my own name out, and I thought, oh great, I can buy myself a present. And then on the day when they presented the presents, I found out that what they actually do is when the person opens the present, and they then find out who bought that present, which I didn't know about that bit. So I bought my own present, and yeah. Anyway, it didn't go well. So so I didn't turn up for the ceremonial opening of the presents, just to make sure that I didn't look like an idiot. Now, if there's owners on board for Christmas, then you're working. It's a normal day. Christmas Day, you'll be working. Everybody will be working, and you won't get any time to celebrate effectively. You will have a nice lunch. The chef will do the business in the galley and make a nice lunch. But you'll be working as normal, cleaning decks. Everything that gets done on a normal day will get done on Christmas Day and New Year's Day if the guests are on board. Now, in terms of presents, going back to presents for a minute, one question that comes up a lot, or it has done in past videos that I've made when I've talked about what it's like working on board a yacht, is does the owner give presents to the crew? Well, generally, in my own experience, and there could be other boats out there that do other things, but in my experience, the owner doesn't buy presents for the crew. But what he might do, especially if he's a good owner, is he might give you a bonus, a Christmas bonus. And I've worked on yachts where we've had a month's salary as a bonus, which is, I don't think there's that many jobs out there that give out bonuses like that. You just get, happy to be paid. But yeah, I've worked on boats where the owners give a Christmas bonus of a month's salary or a month's leave, which is effectively the same thing. So that's really nice if you get a boss who gives those out. Now, there are some owners that give out a bonus at the end of a summer trip. So you do your summer trip, they might be on board for a few months, and at the end of that, he gives a month's salary. So you get an extra month's salary at the end of that trip, and then you also get one at Christmas as well. So, some of the better owners out there, they will give you more than one bonus in the year. Some of them don't give you any bonuses. Now, there's a word about that is that I've worked on some vessels where the bonus has been so contentious that I've actually eventually said, you know what, I wish there was no bonus because people talk for 6 months about whether they're going to get this bonus or not, like it's the end of the world, and at the end of it, I just think, well, I'm happy to just get my salary as long as it comes in on time, which is not always the thing either. But I'd rather, at some points, when it becomes such a big drama of when you're going to get that salary, I'd rather just get the bonus. I'd rather just be happy to get my salary and just forget about it, because it's been, the topic of conversation constantly on some yachts is, are we getting this bonus or not? So yeah, but in some situations, it's been a surprise. Most recently, I've had a month's leave as a bonus, which was really nice. There's even been occasions where Christmas has been postponed. I was on a boat where we went to Germany. We were going into a refit period, and we arrived in Germany. We were in Hamburg, and I was actually looking forward to being there for Christmas period, because it was really nice in Hamburg at Christmas. Very festive decorations and stuff in the city. We were right there in Blumenvoss. There's a tunnel called the Elbe Tunnel, which you can walk through to get to the other side, and then you're right in the city there. And it was Christmas Eve, and we had a phone installed, from a hardwired phone installed from the shipyard, so they could call us. Everything was set up. We had shore power connected, everything. And then at the last minute, 8 o'clock at night, we got a call from the owner's representative to say that we were moving. So the refit was meant to be getting done by Lursen, and at the last minute, he decided to go with another company who'd promised the world, and in half the time, which it was never delivered, by the way. But they promised us everything, and then the owner decided, yeah, okay, so move the boat. So 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, when everyone was about to have Christmas Day the next day, now we had to sail to Rendsburg, and to do that, we had to sail through a number of canals, and we had, so effectively the next day, Christmas Day, was at sea, and we were at sea the whole day, and we arrived at Rendsburg. I think we may have arrived that evening, Christmas Day evening, or the next day. I don't remember now. It was quite a while ago. It's about 9 years ago. So we arrived late. So the captain said, right, well, we're going to postpone Christmas, because obviously we can't do it. Everybody's working. So we just postponed it, and then we had it the next day. On Boxing Day, or the 26th of December was what we call Boxing Day in the UK. And then, and then that was it. So now, one of the things that sometimes happens is, like I said, talking about people with rotation. So generally the way the rotation works on a boat is you have the deck officers, the engineers, and the interior staff, which is stewardesses, all the people, the people who clean cabins, all that kind of stuff. They're all part of the interior, and the way it works, depending on the size of the yacht, depending on a number of things, but generally the engineers get full rotation, because they find it really difficult to retain any engineers who don't get full rotation. Not so much for the deck officers. They tend to get a rotation, the lower ranks, but it's not usually an equal rotation. So they may do 12 weeks on, 6 weeks off, something like that. So it's a little bit different. And then the interior staff very rarely get any rotation. On the bigger boats, they do get some sort of rotation, but not an equal one, not a full rotation as we would call it. As full rotation, like I said, being you work one day and you earn a day's leave. So by the time you finish your 10-week rotation, you've got 10 weeks leave. Well, like I said, for some of the others, it might not be that way, and they might not get rotation at all. In those cases, they earn maybe 8 days leave a month, and that adds up. And then when the boat is laid up somewhere, they can take their leave, and that's the way it works. If you're not on rotation, if you don't have any rotation, you'll only earn a number of days a month, and then you'll get to take it when there's some downtime. Now, what can happen is those crew can take leave, they use up all their paid leave, and then it comes to a period where the boat is in downtime, and they want to take some time off. Let's say they've used up all their paid leave, and then the owner's going to use the boat at Christmas, and then changes his mind and the boat's laid up. Then they take unpaid leave, so they go home and they don't get paid. So that does happen. I've never been in that situation myself. I've only worked on one boat where I wasn't on full rotation, and I wasn't there very long. I think I did one stint, and then I found another job. So yeah, so it can happen where you are about to join a boat at Christmas, or it can happen where you're about to leave a boat at Christmas. Now, the way the rotation works is staggered. And now this came up recently when I did the videos about Scheherazade, and I was saying about how unusual it was that they had effectively 2 crews and they were all joining and all leaving at the same time. First of all, you don't have 2 full crews in the yacht industry. If there are any boats out there, then it is the exception to that rule. I've never worked on one. I've never heard of anyone who's worked on one. And when you work in the industry, as long as I have, you generally have worked with people. When you work on a boat, there's always somebody who's worked on some boat, or they know someone who's worked on this boat or that boat. So very unusual to have that situation. Very unheard of. But the way it actually works is you have staggered leave. So you might join, and there might be another person who joins the same day as you, 2 or 3 people, and then but the rest of the people might be leaving in a month or something like that. It's all staggered. And the reason why you do that is because if you have everyone leave at once, then you have that brain drain, right? You have everything that's been happening in the last month. Let's say there's 4 people in the engine room, in the engineering department, and they all left within a week, and then 2 weeks later there's an issue with the boat. Then nobody's on board who knew about that issue. So all of a sudden now everyone's scratching their head, having to figure out what the problem was that the same people had. Now, yes, you have handovers. So when you join the boat, you hand over, your opposite hands over to you. But there's always things that get forgotten, little details that get forgotten. So no matter how many pages you write in a handover, you're always going to forget something. So you have that staggered rotational system for that reason. So you might let's say I'm flying. I'll give you an example of something that happened to me in the past. I was flying out to French Polynesia, to Papeete in French Polynesia, to join a boat. So that from the UK is in this particular instance, it was a flight from London to Paris. Then it was Paris to Los Angeles, which is a 10-hour flight, and then literally you go very quickly through the airport in LA, and you get on another flight to French Polynesia, which is an 8-hour flight. So you do a 10-hour flight followed by an 8-hour flight. So it's a tough old trip. And then when I got there, it was 7 o'clock in the morning. So what happens then? I go on board. I have to do the handover with my opposite, and then I had to work that day. And I was not in any fit shape to be working because I'd just done 24-hour traveling and didn't get an awful lot of sleep. But what were they going to do? They're not going to let me go and sleep. It was the best thing that happened, really, to get me used to being back on board. But it was hard work anyway. But the point being is that you join that boat, and then you might be having a Christmas break just as you join, or around that time, or you might be leaving just before Christmas. That's a great scenario if you've got family. You know that you're not going to have to be on board, because that is definitely second prize to be on board at Christmas if you've got family at home and you want to go home and celebrate it with them. Now, how does that affect their Christmas leave? Well, it depends, because the way the rotation works in all the time is, the purser on board will work out, or whoever deals with the flights, usually the purser, will figure out the next place that you can join before, like, let's say you're traveling to Bora Bora, which is in Tahiti, if you don't know. To fly to Bora Bora is a little bit more tricky than flying to Papeete. That's where all of the international flights come in. So you could fly to Papeete, join the ship there, and then the boat sails around the islands. That's the best case scenario. Otherwise, you've got to get on one of those little island hopper planes. So the person will work out, all right, he can join in Papeete when we're here, and the other person can leave. So she arranges all the flights in that way. Then you join the boat, and then you have to set, you have your Christmas time on board, which kind of sucks because you've just left your family and then you're on board for Christmas. Now, don't get me wrong, have a great time on board, you with people who you know and all that stuff, but it is always, they're your colleagues. You'd rather be with your family, right? I've been in this situation where I've been unable to leave. I've been expecting to go home, and then for one reason or another, the owners decided that then, like, the boat's headed to place A. The purser has arranged flights for both people to join. The other person's already there waiting to join, and then the owners said, right, we're not going there now. I've changed my mind. We're going to go to place B. And now all of a sudden, my opposite is in place A, and we're going to place B, and the purser has to scramble and find a flight from A to B, and then the time that it takes to get there obviously has an effect on whether you're going to be on board during Christmas or not. And I've been in that situation, and it sucks. So, but these are all the things. This is the kind of things that happen when you're at sea. I've even been in a situation where I've had to join with the pilot boat. So I was on I was joining a cruise ship. It was a cruise ship actually at the time, and my flight was late, and the ship had to leave. They had a slot to leave, and they had to leave. So I had to join on the pilot boat. I had to get on the pilot boat. The pilot boat was going to collect the pilot. Was already on board the ship. So the pilot takes the ship out of the marina or the port, and then the pilot gets off into his little boat and then heads back to that port. And I was on the pilot boat, so I got there, tied a line onto my suitcases. The crew pulled them up, and I climbed up the pilot's ladder and got on board. So that's how last minute it was. It's all part of working at sea. It's you look at the time, it's not so much fun, but when you look back on it, it's kind of funny to tell these stories. So yeah, it's very interesting to be on board at Christmas. By far the best thing to do is to be on board when the boat is laid up, because then you all get to relax and get a couple of days off if you're lucky, and then have the New Year's party, and then that's it. My current boat is currently laid up, and they would have had the best case scenario out of those two: boss off, laid up, Christmas on board. So that's the best. Like I said, that's the best case scenario, is that you're if you're on board, that the owner's not on board, because if he is, then you're working as normal. But they do try and look after you. Sometimes they will, they'll tell the captain to spend some money, on booze and stuff like that. Now that's assuming that you're allowed to drink on board. There are some boats that don't, that they're dry boats. I've been on yachts that they will put out like a bottle of wine on each table for dinner at night, or a few cans of beer. And then there are other boats that they don't have any alcohol on board. It's a dry boat. And also I've been on board with captains don't let the crew drink when the boat's at sea. So it might be boss off, no guests on board, but they might be transiting to a new location, and the captain doesn't want anybody drinking, which I think is a bit much. I mean, like I said, I don't really drink, so it doesn't affect me at all. So, but I think it's kind of saying that you don't trust the crew to be responsible, you know. So, but yeah, it all depends on the captain, and ultimately it stops with him, doesn't it? So yeah, being on board at Christmas is fun. I've had some good times. Like I said, the majority of the time I've been on board, but this year I'm not. As you can see, I'm in a hotel. So it's been quite fun. So it's been very different experience for me. Like I said, in the last 25 years, very few times that I've not been on board. So that's become the norm for me. In terms of, you know, do any people get lonely or anything like that, which is a question that's come up. You don't have time to be lonely on a yacht. You know, you're sharing a cabin unless you're, you know, high up, chief engineer, chief officer, purser, captain. They'll have their own cabins. On a bigger boat. The smaller boat, some of those people might have to share. Chief engineer, captain usually guaranteed a single cabin, and on a very large boat, you know, 100 meter, 115 meter plus, then you start to get other people with a single cabin. Now there has been a change in the laws recently, in the maritime laws, that say that any watchkeeper has to have a single cabin. So on a new build, if you go on a boat that's been built in the last 3 or 4 years, and you're a watchkeeper, so i.e. engineer or deck officer, then you will get your own cabin. So yeah, Christmas on board. So yeah. So we'll move on. This is our main topic, and we're just going to cover some of the stuff that come up after the Zelensky yacht story. Now, if you're not familiar with that story, a story surfaced about a month ago, where supposedly the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky had bought 2 superyachts through 2 friends of his, 2 proxies. The boats were, you know, the story was effectively that he was using money that he was getting to fight the war to buy 2 yachts. We looked at the story on the channel, and we very quickly came to the conclusion that the story was not true. In a few various different ways, we come to that. Firstly, the 2 yachts that were supposedly bought by Zelensky, they're still for sale now. So we're a month later, approximately, and those boats are still for sale. One of them was called My Legacy. It's for sale for 44.9 million euros. Still for sale. This has been confirmed by the companies. If you want to see the boats advertising, I'll put the link in the below of this video if you're watching on YouTube, and you can click on that link. But they're on the Burgess website, My Legacy, and the other boat was called Lucky Me, and that's on a Benmar website, benmar.com. I'll put the links below, as I said. When you know it's not a true story, then you look at the names of the boats and you say that whoever made this story up, they couldn't even resist. You know, instead of using some generic yacht names like, you know, like there's some here, Ice Bear or Atlas, Bookends. These are the yachts that are for sale on Burgess website. But they went with My Legacy, you know, and the other one, Lucky Me, just to make people even a little bit more annoyed than they might have already been. The fact that of the potential of the using of fate of this money to buy these yachts. But like I said, we proved pretty quickly that was one reason, is that the boats are still for sale. We asked the companies at the time, you know, have these boats been sold? They told us no, they haven't been sold. And then the memorandum of agreements, the contracts that were supposedly for these yachts to have been bought, we contacted the company that makes these contracts, and they said no, these contracts are bogus. They're not accurate. They said, first of all, that version of the contract hasn't been used for 9 years. and there's actually and those contracts that you showed me, that there are actually bits that have been doctored on those contracts to change the way they look. There was signature blocks omitted from the contracts and stuff like that. So they said that any and it actually says in the wording of the contract itself that if there's any changes to this contract, or if it's not, if the contract is out of date, then the contract is null and void. So nobody's going to use a null and void contract, right? Everybody gets these contracts from the same place, and they're called the Mediterranean Yacht Brokers Association. All of the brokerages, or most of the brokerages, use their contracts because they are the best ones to use. I don't know the details of why they use them in particular, but that's what they all do. Now, the idea that two separate companies that are not connected in any way, Burgess and Benamar, would use the same, changed contract it's beyond the realms of believability, isn't it? It's like, you're not going to believe that two separate companies. Now, one comment that I did see is that they could have been drawn up by the same lawyer, but these contracts are written. These contracts are used by the different companies, right? And they're not going to use. They're not filled in by lawyers. They're filled in by the people, the brokers. So, and like I said, it's completely separate companies. And they're out of date, so they'd be null and void. No one's going to spend $45 million or 45 million euros, fill out a bogus contract, and then that effectively they're not buying that product. So it was a fake sale. It was a fake story, and the weird thing about it is that even after we posted the video, the majority of the people were like, "Oh, thanks for going through this, and I'm glad you showed that it's not a real story and stuff like that." But quite a number of people were leaving comments on the channel saying, "Oh, what you don't understand is this story's true," even though we showed that it wasn't true. And we contacted all these companies. We went to the source, which is what I always do if I hear a story, is I go and look at the source myself, because unfortunately, in this day and age, there are a lot of people who have agendas, who look for stories like this to reinforce their agenda. The thing that they want to talk about, the thing that they want to push, they want to find anything that will fit with their political agenda. One of the places that we talked about at the time, one of the YouTube channels that had over 2 million subscribers, they ran this story based on, the source was somebody who called himself a reporter, had no online presence at all, really, except for a Twitter page and a YouTube channel with one video on it, which was this video about Zelensky. And a lot of, if you search for the Zelensky yachts, there's a lot of websites out there. None of the mainstream news channels covered this story that I know of. There was 24, France 24 covered it, an English language version of it, which is a channel, a European channel. They covered it, and they did it 4 days after we did it, and they basically did the same thing. They talked about the contract being out of date, and they showed the new contract versus the old contract, etc., etc. So they did the exact same story that we did, but 4 days after we did it. So I think they must have seen our story as well. But if you search for that story, you found an awful lot of different places. They've used the source, this invisible guy with one story on his YouTube channel, and then they're pushing it. Now, those places like the redacted channel, which ran the story, which is what I saw, or somebody said, a few people who follow our channel sent it to us, and I saw it on redacted first, and they're very convincing, right? Because they're telling the story, and if you are a regular follower of that channel, you have no reason to doubt what they're saying, because you assume, if they are journalists, that they are doing their due diligence on that story before they run the story. But they didn't. They just ran the story. They heard it. They ran it for whatever reasons, they seem to be politically biased. I'm not going to get into the politics of why they did it, what they did. But from what I can see, or what we saw, is that they didn't check the data, the information that they got. They just ran the story because it probably fit with what they wanted to say. I don't know if that's true. I think it was based on some of the other stories that were in that same video. They mentioned some other stuff which we very easily proved to not be true. A shopping trip in New York City was one of the things that came up in one of the videos, that Zelensky's wife was supposed to have gone on this shopping trip. But when we looked at the date on the receipt of the shopping, of the receipt of the so-called trip that she did in this shop, it was the 22nd of August. And when we checked where she was, because she was with Zelensky on a state trip at the time, and when we checked where she was in Ottawa in Canada at a state function. So it was impossible that she could have been in those two places at once. So that was, we debunked that story quite easily as well. So the stories were, I mean, that was just very easily, very quickly done, just to see if they had a pattern of doing fake stories, or doing stories that were not as cut and dry as they appeared to be. Going back to the Zelensky story, unfortunately, it's one of those things that is happening all too often now. And I think the reason why is because people get disheartened with the mainstream news, and I get it, I get that. But what I've noticed is, in my own recent experience with the mainstream news and stuff like that, is when a story comes up, and we've done some videos in the past on the channel. There was some, the Young Turks, this was going back 2 or 3, maybe even 4 years now. They did some stories, and we debunked those stories as well, because they just weren't factually very accurate. And just listening to the story, the way they told it, was like, what are they talking about? Just because of the experience that I had in the industry, I knew there was some problems with that story. So we went and checked the data, and we found the data to be incorrect or misunderstood, which was the one story was about somebody politically minded who had a yacht, and the yacht was flagged in the Cayman Islands or something like that. Now, everybody does that. There's reasons behind it. There's also reasons why you can't use a US flag. Up until very recently, up until maybe 2018, they changed the laws there. But up until very recently, if you had a vessel over 3,000 gross tons, then you couldn't register it. No, it wasn't even 3,000 gross tons. It was less than that. I think it was 300 gross tons. I'd have to go back and watch my own video. But there was a very small limit on the amount of the tonnage of your yacht before it became a commercial vessel. So that was the reason why nobody was registering their vessel in the US up until very recently, because anything over, I think it was 300 gross tons, and if it's not, I'll put a correction somewhere on screen, then the vessel had to be registered as a commercial vessel, which is a whole different ballgame when it comes to regulations and fire safety and everything. That it would cost you, 3 times as much to build a yacht under those regulations. So they will go outside and use a flag from a different country. And there are legitimate reasons, like that is one of them, like I just said, for doing that. It's not always a bogus reason, because it's flag of convenience is done by commercial vessels as well. It's usually for tax reasons, but unfortunately, like I said, you have to check the source. Another thing that came out after we did the Zelensky story was people were saying, well, yeah, okay, well, maybe this story is not true, but what about the Pandora Papers? They said that he has billions in bank accounts in the British Virgin Islands and stuff like that. So we checked on the Pandora Papers as well. What that Pandora Papers, if you don't know what that is, it's like if you've ever heard of the Panama Papers, basically it was leaked documents from whistleblowers in banks and stuff like that in different places. They just leaked out a load of paperwork online, and they found that Zelensky had these businesses registered in the British Virgin Islands. Now, there are legitimate reasons for having businesses registered in different countries like this. Like I said, most of it's to do with tax, but there are other reasons as well. So just having a bank account in British Virgin Islands is not a sign of criminal activity. Also, the Pandora Papers never actually said how much money he had. It just said that he had a number of businesses registered in these banks, in these countries. So yeah, again, you know, people who have political agendas will take a story and they will embellish that story with more information to make it sound worse, and then you know, they'll make the credibility of the story is the facts and the data that the facts and the data that they show whilst they tell the story, which makes it sound credible, right? As in the Zelensky story, they had the memorandum of agreement. Without those fake documents, they never would have had a story, right? But the memorandum of agreement with all the redacted information on it, it makes it look more legitimate than if they just told the story without those things, right? Put some signatures on there, and then everybody's like, oh my God, this is true. You know, it's everybody's seen a redacted form before and they know why it's redacted like that. So yeah, so it's unfortunate that the sources are not checked. If you go and watch the video of the person who created this story, that where the conspiracy theory was born, this invisible chap that's on YouTube, if you watched his video, you would find it not very credible, because, you know, who is this person? And if anybody tells you anything, you've got to ask, and I learned this in the military, if somebody tells you something, your first question should be, why are they telling you this information? What's their agenda? Do they have one? Are they credible? You know? So, like, we use a lot of confidential sources on our channel, but we have people who we know have been reliable in the past. So if they come to us with a story, then we know that they're more credible than others. I've had people come to me personally. We've had people come to Xmas Superyachts with a story, and they've offered us no evidence to back the story up. It's just word of mouth. And, you know, it's not enough for us. So we haven't gone with that story. And some of the stories have been really interesting, and we can't prove it independently. We like to prove a story ourselves before we go with it, and we can't always do that. So it's too risky. If we tell you a story that turns out to not be true, then our credibility suffers, doesn't it? In theory, like I said, a lot of these news sources that they're coming with all of these stories, and they never really get disproven, especially in the yachting industry. It's very hard. It's so secretive. It's very hard to prove or disprove a story. So these stories just float around out there and people believe them. The Zelensky story was actually picked up by some politicians in the US. And according to that, according to their own Twitter feeds, they even used it as a reason to not grant the latest raft of money to go to Ukraine to buy weapons and ammunition and stuff like that. Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of the politicians who actually posted on Twitter she reposted the story, the original story about him buying these yachts, which obviously you now know is not true. The fact that the boats are still for sale as well should be another identifier for you that the stories are not true. And even the link that Marjorie Taylor Greene posted on Twitter has a box on it saying that that she's linking to a source that has been sanctioned by the US government as a propaganda arm of Russian foreign ministry that spreads disinformation. And this is what I was going back to saying earlier, is that people get disheartened with the mainstream news, and I understand that. So what they do, though, is they go out of the mainstream area and they say, well, where can I find news? This news is, I can't trust this news for one reason or another, whether it be CNN or Fox News or, you know, One America News or whatever they called it, all of those different companies. So people say, well, I'm going to go somewhere else and I'm going to find the truth. But what they usually stumble on is a misinformation site. I go to a car meet every month, and one of the guys that goes there is I nicknamed him I called him a conspiracy theorist. He feels like he's telling the truth, but the stories he's telling are clearly designed as misinformation. And you know, I get into it sometimes with him, but I surprisingly hadn't seen the Zelensky Yacht story, because I was expecting him to to talk to me about it when I saw him at the meet, but he didn't. But anyway, the point being is that he is the same. He's probably fed up with the the BBC, all of the companies that do news in the UK, and they go outside. And he said he gets his information from a Greek website, and he has to translate it into English, and the stories are all crazy, and it comes from that. It comes from the lack of trust of the places that we used to get our news from, which again, I keep saying I understand why people don't want to trust it. But the way I would look at it is, and it's not the easiest way to do it, but if you hear a story, go and verify it for yourself. It's not that hard now with the internet. You can find out. You can go to the source and you can find out. But it is a minefield. So that's the downside. I think I might have said this already, but I'll just go over it once more. Fake Story is Born is, this guy puts his story on the internet. He has some questionable evidence, and it gets picked up by these other people, and then they run with it, and then people trust that those other people. With it, they wouldn't trust the source, but they trust the other people, redacted, and the other people who ran with that story, and all of a sudden, that story becomes a big story, and it's not true. And like I said, nobody ever really has to do a reach. I remember when I was younger, and the news would do a retraction of a story. They would say, we did a story last week and we actually got some information wrong, and we apologize and stuff. You don't see that anymore. Now, whenever we do, if we ever do anything on the channel and it turns out we got something wrong, some data wrong, that we gave the wrong name of a company, in the next video, we will do a retraction and we'll say we actually got some information wrong here, and here's the actual information. And we don't see news companies doing that anymore, which is probably another reason why people have a lack of trust of those news companies. Anyway, I think I've rattled on long enough. It's about 50 minutes, I think, that I've been talking. So I hope you found this video interesting, or podcast, should I say, for those of you who are listening. Let us know in the comments. If you haven't done so already, go to @Yacht Report Podcast on YouTube. If you type @Yacht Report Podcast all in one and press enter, you'll find our channel. You can find links on the Xmas Super Yacht channel as well. Go over there and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We've got about 260 subscribers on there right now. But yeah, it's a new channel. There's one other podcast on there. We're planning on doing this every 1 to 2 weeks. I'm not sure yet on the schedule. It just depends on the work that we do. We don't want to impact the videos that we put out onto the channel. We generally do 3 to 4 videos a week on the main channel, and this is going to be something that's going to be on top of that. So it might be that we'll do it every 2 weeks for now. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, make sure to subscribe. If you want to follow us on Spotify, you can find us on there. The Yacht Report Podcast, the same name everywhere, and on Apple Podcasts as well. On Spotify, you can actually watch the video version of it. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments. Like I said, we'll have a conversation about the topics down there. All right, thanks very much, and I'll catch up with you soon. Bye-bye.